ideally, what you want to have with this Industry 4.0 system is that I now get an order from my customer, and then my system is actually going to be able to tell me what plant, what line, what operator, during what shift am I going to make this particular product, because I've already consumed all of this data because I have all of that as an information.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Traditionally, most systems used on the shop floor were disconnected. Even if you had multiple systems, such as ERP or MES, they didn't have real-time connectivity with the machines. And to get data from these systems, manufacturers created data lakes and powered dashboards using the insights gathered from these lakes. While these dashboards provide visibility into operations to some degree, they were deficient in providing the controls that connected systems would offer. With the help of MQTT and a unified namespace, now you can connect all your disparate systems on the shop floor using a gateway or broker. In today's episode, we have our guest, David Schultz, who shares his insights into how manufacturers can increase the capacity from their existing investments by connecting them in real time. He also discusses how traditional methods of creating data lakes fall short, as they would not allow real-time decision-making and capacity optimization. Finally, he discusses several KPIs that operations managers need to know to optimize the capacity at the plant level. Let me introduce David to you. David has 25 years of automation and process control experience across many market verticals. He currently works with manufacturers to help them develop and execute strategies for digital transformation and asset management. He is a member of the International Society of Automation, also known as ISA, Society of Maintenance and Reliability Professionals, also known as SMRP, and Project Management Institute. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey David, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. I'm super excited to be here.
And I am super excited to have you as well, because the kind of stories you are going to be able to talk about on this show, they are going to be super fascinating for our listeners. They always hear, Industry 4.0, MQTT, so many different things, so many different buzzwords. But if you are the executives and if you are planning for these initiatives, you need to know at a deeper level what is going to be ROI. Obviously, we all want to invest in that, but we want to figure out how this is going to help the organization. Just to kick things off, David, do you want to start with your personal story and your current focus these days?
Yeah, so what I work with is small to medium manufacturers on helping them digitally transform. And my entire goal has always been around how do companies in today's manufacturing environment, how do they compete with some of these global overseas companies that just come to the market with some better advantages?
Yeah.
And I've always focused on asset performance management, so getting more availability and reliability of equipment.
Yeah.
And then Industry 4.0 showed up, and it was, this is the thing. It fits in with the whole asset performance management, but it's also taking all of this data that's being produced in your manufacturing process and being able to get that to decision makers in real time so they can act more quickly. And so that's now what I get focused on, is helping them digitally transform so they can get data, get into the decision makers as quickly as possible.
Okay, amazing. So great background. I think I'm going to have a lot of questions there on that. But before we do that, we have one of these standard questions, David, that we ask every single guest that come on the show. And that is going to be your perspective on business growth, David.
So right now, my perspective on business growth, and again, it's all around digital transformation and Industry 4.0.
Yeah.
This is something you better learn about very quickly, or you are not going to have a business to grow at all. The ones that do transform faster, those are going to be the ones that are going to be leading into the 21st, the next decade and 2 decades of manufacturing. So for those that do, your growth is going to be phenomenal. It's all about how quickly can you digitally transform. For those that are not really sure, they think, oh, this is all buzz and noise and those types of things. Unfortunately, it's not going to be a very exciting future for you.
Okay, amazing. I love this perspective, especially if it comes from the technical community. But as you know, our community is made up of finance and operations executives, and they tend to be slightly conservative overall the way they actually invest in anything. So obviously, we want to understand if there is a real play for us here in this space, so that we don't miss the bus. But we want to understand all the risks and the benefits associated with these transformations. So how about this? I mean, how about we start with one of the stories of the work that you have done? And my goal from this conversation is going to be to understand, let's say, if you were able to digitally transform them, what does it mean? And what was the real output, the tangible output that the company got from these initiatives? So do you want to provide a little bit of background of a specific story that you have worked on related to either Industry 4.0 or the digital transformation, the work that you typically do?
You betcha. So I'm going to circle on one of the comments since we're talking finance and CFOs. I think oftentimes why digital transformation, Industry 4.0 initiatives don't get a lot of attention is because the experience has always been every time we've wanted to come in and put in some software, it's been extremely expensive. And so we have to outlay, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Things go over budget, things go over time. And at the end of the day, we look back and say, well, how much value did this actually produce? As we went in and thought there was ROI, but boy, I'm really hard pressed to actually measure what goes on with that. And one of the beauties of digital transformation and the way that I focus on it is everything is really done as this agile sprint of we come in and we just do, there's this very first step. That proof of concept is something in that $30,000 range where it's going to build upon the rest of that transformation journey. And so as we build these things out, we look back and say, okay, what did we produce here? And then we can say, okay, what's the next thing that we want to do? The other side of this, and one of the challenges that I run to, is because people always want to know, what's the ROI on this?
Yep.
And sometimes it's very difficult for us to capitalize on. And so the example that I like to use is your Apple, your smartphone. I'm an Apple user myself. If all of a sudden you were Steve Jobs and you had to go in and provide your shareholders the ROI on an iPhone, I mean, how would you do that? I mean, it's been game changing. So think about in terms of manufacturing that your business, the information that you have, what you're doing in this digital transformation is going to be like your business in your pocket, that anytime, anywhere, you can actually bring up some functionality that sits on your mobile device and know exactly how your business is operating from day to day. It's that I'm going to know exactly what's running on every production line. I'm going to know how much it's costing me. I don't know how much is invested, how much is in the bank. All of these things that you currently get in your personal life, you're going to be able to see with your business and your manufacturing.
Yeah, so trust me, I mean, most of the executives that I speak to, they understand the value of Industry 4.0. They understand the value of digitally transforming their operations and the benefits that they are going to get from these initiatives. Their challenge always is to sort of how to go from point A to point B, and which are the initiatives that I should be considering first based on my current situation. Okay, so let's say if I have very legacy machines and on my shop floor, if my primary issue is going to be really related to quality. So my goal is going to be to fix that, right? If I don't have real visibility into whether I should be buying additional machines, if I should be investing $1 million there, or should I be looking at my shop floor first, if there are ways to improve the efficiency of the shop floor. So obviously, as the executive, I get pitched, let's say, 100 or 200 different ideas on a daily basis, to be honest. They all seem to be claiming that, they can do wonders for me, but I need need to be cognizant of my budget, right?
Absolutely.
So my goal from this insight is going to be that if you can actually provide the real story of the work that you have done, what were the sort of challenges, how the process was when you started from your POC phase to whatever you delivered. Do you want to walk us through, let's say, the manufacturing facility, what kind of business it was, what kind of products, what kind of customers, what kind of vendors, they were working with, and then take us through that journey from point A to point B of transformation?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned earlier about this legacy equipment and getting things connected. So it's been my experience, regardless of what your industry is and what you're manufacturing, is that you do have a lot of antiquated equipment that's out
Yeah.
there. And when I say antiquated, I mean that it's really just producing data that is all out there. But how do I get that into a format where I can utilize that? So a lot of my work is in the food and beverage space, or CPGs, and you're going to find a lot of this equipment that sits out there that it has a lot of technology on it, but it's not connected. How do I get that data connected? It's producing it. How do I actually get that out of there where I can now consume it in other parts of the business? So again, oftentimes that becomes the very first step of getting everything connected so I can do that. And there's a number of ways that I go about doing that with some various technologies, something that's called a gateway. And now I'm publishing that into a central, what I call a unified namespace, where I can get that data out. So that's fundamentally the first one. The next thing is that once we have actually, and this is speaking to a very specific story, is now how do I actually visualize that data? Because again, it's the right information in the right hands, the right format, with the right time. How do I get all that information out right away? And so it's also, I focus a lot on what's known as OEE, so it's overall equipment effectiveness. And what that's going to tell me is how am I actually producing down there? So I can't actually truly measure my OEE until I'm actually getting that data generated in real time. So for this one particular food manufacturer, it was a rather manual process. They were going through and trying to spitball their downtime, and they would have these all kinds of charts where the operator would go through and we now had a downtime, and well, I think I was down for 15 minutes. It could have been a half an hour, and they would say, well, it was for this particular reason. So it's a very manual process. So the next step is, once we get all that data connected, it's now start into actually getting all the data connected automatically and coming up with the real downtime reasons and the real times that all of those things occurred. And what this translates to is, now once I'm capturing this in real time, is that there was a customer I was working with that they were looking at doing a plant expansion. They just thought they were producing everything they could produce at 24/7. And the reality is once you started going through there and getting that real information for them, all of a sudden their transformation was game changing for them, because they realized, holy cow, we can produce 4 times the amount of material with our existing equipment. So instead of going out and building a new plant and buying a whole bunch of equipment, which I don't even remember what the CapEx on that was, they were now able to optimize their current process. And along with that, they also realized that much of what was chewing up their time was just quality issues. It's that there's these things are bad, that thing is bad. And once they were able to get in and get the system and get that data presented to them, they were able to do this with not a lot of investment. They were actually able to produce way more equipment. And it was game changing for them, because the people up at the corporate office, they finally took note of, what is this particular plant doing?
Okay, so very interesting story. So we are going to go one level deeper into the story. Okay, so let's talk about. So obviously there were problems, and then the ROI from that was 4x, which is phenomenal. That they didn't really have the awareness that they could probably get the 4x mileage from their existing investments. Now, this is music to CFO's ears, because that's what they want to do, to be honest. Okay, they want to capitalize as much as possible on the existing investment. So now, let's say, if I'm thinking, again, I talk to many different IT folks as the CFO, and when I talk to them, in my mind, data is information. You are getting data from your machines, but how is this data different from many other data sets that I may have in the organization, and why Industry 4.0 data sets are such a big deal that they need to be dealt differently from your other data sets that I may have from my ERP, from CRM, from e-commerce, from WMS. So how is Industry 4.0 data set, they are going to be different from your other data sets?
Okay, yeah. So the way that it's different is, yes, you're producing a lot of data that's out there, but that data is not coming in context.
Okay.
So my specific example in this case is that I need to be able to know what is my production order? What am I actually running on my equipment at any one state and time? And sometimes that's coming from a manufacturing execution system. And then it's, what's the overall health of my process? What is my current time OEE? What's my batch time OEE? What is my shift OEE? I need all that data available to me in real time. That's part of what this unified namespace allows me to do. Do I have an active work order? So if my particular system is now in a downtime event, when time did that event start? Is there an active work order? What's my production line? Who's my operator? So what Industry 4.0 does is it provides all that information together. And I'm going to use another buzzword out there, but it does mean something, is IIoT. So this industrial Internet of Things. Part of what Industry 4.0 does in this overall movement that is currently taking place is how we connect these systems together. And that's the fundamental difference. And so, ideally what you want to have with this Industry 4.0 system is that I now get an order from my customer, and then my system is actually going to be able to tell me what plant, what line, what operator, during what shift am I going to make this particular product, because I've already consumed all of this data, because I have all of that as an information. I have it in context. I know all of these things coming in, and I can look back at a historical trend of, on this particular product, who makes it the best in my entire organization? Who is that one person that I want to do that with? And there's some other decisions that get made in there as far as plant location, logistics, those types of things. And that's largely the reason why I like starting with the OEE piece, is because there's so much value that can be created by doing that. And so once I know exactly how my equipment's running, I can now debottleneck and I can start actually manufacturing better equipment. So literally in Industry 4.0 using IoT, my CRM is connected, my ERP is connected, my manufacturing execution system's connected, my SCADA system, as it's called, so how I actually manufacture and control the process, that's all connected. So everything is coming to me in real time. That's what Industry 4 is all about. It's not taking a bunch of stuff and putting it into a big data lake and thinking there's going to be some magic that occurs out of that. It is truly getting these things connected and then start doing it in an iterative fashion of creating more and more valuable information as the journey continues.
Okay, so some great examples there and some great KPIs, obviously, as executive. I mean, I care for these KPIs, but my challenge when I look at the different KPIs, if I talk to my MES vendor, let's say if I have MES on my shop floor, they are going to claim that they can measure the OEE, and they are going to provide the OEE for all of my equipment. If I actually talk to my equipment provider, they are going to say that, you get OEE out of the box for the equipment, and that should be good enough for you. If you actually talk to ERP provider, even ERP providers are going to say that, you have KPI called OEE as part of ERP. So how come we have so many different OEEs, and who am I trusting here?
So here is the problem with that, is that right now all of those systems sit in their own ecosystem, in their own environment. My MES doesn't talk to anything else. My ERP, all it's doing is, yes, it's facilitating all of my accounting and work orders and all those types of things. But the only thing it does is it pushes the order out. And after that, it just really does not have any visibility into that. So there was a company that I was working with that they're all looking for this single pane of glass. I want to be able to see all this information in real time together, right? So what you do is you go out and you buy some software that allows you to visualize your ERP. You can visualize your CMMS. You can visualize your MES. You can visualize your SCADA. So you have all these things together. But here's the reality. You're just looking at this system on the same screen. You're just looking at this system as it exists. It's basically a screen share. It's here what it is. So if you now want to know what's my job number, what am I actually running, what's that SKU that's being made on this particular system in the OEE, how would you go about actually aligning that data to know how well does this SKU run on this particular line with all this other data? it's not connected. Yes, they can provide all that data, but they can't provide it together all in one system. And again, the prevailing thought is we're just going to put it all in a data lake and scrub it from there, but it becomes very challenging because the data doesn't come in at the same time. There's a whole lot of data manipulation. This ETL is really where a lot of this gets bogged down. So again, why I use the architecture. So answering your question of, I already have my MES vendor that can tell me this. I mean, and that story about looking at these 5 different systems on one screen is very true. And it was very expensive to get all this stuff together. And then it was just the reality of, okay, great, I'm looking at it in real time. I can't analyze it in real time. That's the problem. And so it's the MES, they can provide it. They can give it to you, your ERP vendor. They can provide that data for you. But again, they can't provide it all together in one system in real time that is not going to just cost so much money that you're out of business because you run out of time. We'll talk about pilot purgatory. That exists because this is what people are trying to do. They're trying to apply Industry 3.0 techniques and thinking to an Industry 4.0 problem. And those are the types of challenges and solutions that I work on day in and day out.
Okay, so let's talk about obviously the ERP is not going to have the real-time inputs. Some ERP in the market, maybe they are capable of doing, maybe they are capable of integrating directly with the machines. We have seen some of the manufacturing ERP nowadays can actually do that, okay? Some of the MES systems, the SCADA capabilities that you are going to have to talk to your PLCs, that resides in a lot of different MES systems as well. So I don't know which MES system here we are talking about. So let's take an example of the data lake. That you said data lake is not going to work because if you dump everything in data lake, that's probably not going to be real time. So number one, I don't know if my listeners are really going to be familiar with what data lake is. That is number one problem. Okay, and number two problem is, okay, describe a little bit more why data lake is not going to be sufficient for me, why I would require the MQTT and the real-time integration with the machines to be able to create this real-time picture that you mentioned. That obviously I understand the benefits, but I'm still not clear overall in terms of how this is going to play out with the different systems I have and different investment that I have. Because if you think from the CFO perspective, I'm not just worried about my machine investment. I'm also worried about my software investment because I have invested in so many different software. So how are they going to work together is my concern. So tell us a little bit about, the data lake and why that is going to be deficient and how the new solution is going to solve all of the problems that I have with the real-time visibility in my operations.
Okay. So from the CFO perspective, it's that, yes, there are systems that can do all this, but currently in your manufacturing environment, you already have software that's there. And if someone were to come in and say, well, what you need to do is that you need to rip out all of this software that you currently have, and you need to put in the new Industry 4.0 software, that becomes a pretty big check.
Yep.
And so what people are trying to do is, well, rather than me going out and replacing my software, why don't I take all of that data and connect it point to point into this big data lake? That's what it is all of this just discrete single piece of information that I now go through, and I'm going to create this single bespoke connection into this big data lake. So now I'm at least getting all of the data that's being produced by my PLC, by my SCADA, by my MES, by all these other systems. And I'm going to dump it all in there, and then I'm going to hire a very expensive data scientist. They're going to come in and they're going to provide some value. One of the stories I like to share is there's a show called South Park, and they have what's called the underpants gnomes, and they're going to steal underpants and they're going to make profit. And so the same analogy here is that I'm going to build my data lake and I'm going to get great information out of it because that's what somebody told me I could do with an Industry 4.0. So you mentioned MQTT. So going back to what I talked about in this unified namespace is that I'm actually using MQTT, which is a protocol that can be a communication protocol that I can take data from all these disparate systems and I can bring them into a broker. And so think of a broker as just a server. It's the central hub where all this data is going to be publishing. MQTT is great because it's open, it's lightweight, it's edge-driven, meaning that everything that's producing data, it's actually occurring where that data is produced. and it's also report by exception. And that is the fundamental key for how all this data works. So if there's a change that's occurring in my manufacturing level, whether it's a PLC tag, or it's some SCADA data, or it's my OEE data, or I now have a work order, or I now have some new order just came in, or I just sent a quote out to a customer, that data using your ERP master data model is now being modeled inside that broker that now has all of these systems that are coming together. And if you think about it, all of that data is now lined up in real time because everything that just published its most current value, you can also visualize that right at the exact same time. The cost to do this is so inexpensive relative to that data lake and this sometimes what gets called data threading, where I'm just making point-to-point connections, because I can take whatever my data payload is, I'm producing it, I know what the data I have that I can just send right out to you. I'm now going to publish that exactly. So you can see that data model is coming in from that equipment in real time that every other system can consume. And it's using this really nice, lightweight, open report by exception, edge-driven protocol to do it. I'm going to take it one step further. I apologize for getting way too technical for the CFOs, but there's one of the challenges of MQTT is that it's open. It's not as defined. It's one of the best thing about of MQTT is it's open. The worst thing about MQTT is that it's open. I need to get some standardization around how all of my data is being consumed. So in the manufacturing environment, we'll use an architecture. It's a specification that's called SparkplugB that now puts some meat around how we're actually going to publish all of that information. So that when it's coming through, it's now going to come in a way that we can all agree on. This is the format that how we're going to publish all this data so everything else can consume it and understand what it's looking at.
Okay, so amazing. So let's go back to the story that you were mentioning and let's talk about some of those KPIs that you had mentioned, right? So let's say if my executives might not be familiar with some of those KPIs and they might not be sure whether they can get those KPIs right now based on the kind of limitations that they have. So you mentioned a couple of things. Number one, the best time OEE, the current time OEE. So what are some of the KPIs that you have seen, especially in the food industry, because you have done a lot of work there, right? So what are some of the KPIs that are going to be super relevant for the operations manager that they definitely need to get to be able to make decisions whether, to buy a new machine, whether to upgrade, or whether to do something with the plant floor?
Yeah, I hate to make this seem like it's a big seminar on OEE, but that is the fundamental KPI. It's that understanding, that's really the decision point around, am I going to buy new equipment or not? And it's only because, am I able to produce as much as I can with this existing equipment? So when you start getting into your return on your asset, am I squeezing as much money out of this piece of equipment as I can? And that's the number that OEE and its partner specification TEEP, which actually takes it one level of abstraction up. Those are the KPIs that we're looking for. For a particular plant, their main KPI was how quickly do we get work orders executed? So I talk about OEE, it's going to tell me there's a downtime event. But how long did it actually take to get that equipment back online? How quickly am I responding to my work orders? Also want to know how long am I in a changeover state, meaning I just got done producing widget A, I'm ready to do widget B. How long is it taking me to get that changeover or to get ready to go on this changeover time? They want to know how quickly is somebody who's actually kitting this information. So a lot of food sometimes is more just, say you make Oscar Mayer Lunchables. It's how long did it take my crackers and my meat and my cheese to show up? I'm now ready to make the next product. How quickly does that show up and getting it all ready to go so I can now actually start making some product out of that. Trying to think of some of the other very specific quality coming off the line. So we talk a lot about OEE. There's something that's called weight management or product giveaways. Now I want to know, what is sometimes it gets called SPC. But that's a little more involved. It's really just about weight control. And I want to know, if I have a 4-ounce package that's coming off my line and my specification is 4.1 ounces, 4.2 ounces, how much am I getting 4.5s? Am I getting 4.8s? Because that's lost revenue. So that's another very common one that I run across. Trying to think of some of the other these dashboard type things that show up. And when I was talking about there's the runtime, there's a real batch time. What's my OEE on this product?
Yeah.
And the reason why you want to know that, is because does this product run well on machine 1 or machine 2? There's the shift OEE. So now I need to know, are my operators taking some extra long breaks, those types of things.
So let's say if we talk about the batch OEE versus the current OEE that you mentioned, right? So let's say if my listeners are not really familiar with what is the difference between those two KPIs. So you mentioned that you want to know these KPIs across the machines to know which machines are actually doing better. But let's say if I'm not familiar with what is the difference between batch versus the other, can you describe that a bit?
Yeah, so your batch OEE is how well am I running this particular SKU on this particular machine. That's what's going to give me my batch OEE. So if I hate to use widgets again, but I'm making widget A on line 1, how well does machine 1, line 1 make widget A? And then when I'm done with widget A, I'm going to make widget B. How well did widget B operate on line 1 versus line 2, line 3?
Yeah.
And so this starts getting into some of this production planning that is also part of this industry, industry 4.0 of making sure that I get the right product on the line. So that's going to give me my batch ID. I got to make 10,000 of this. How well did that 10,000 run? That's my batch. It's from the timestamp is from the start to the end of that particular one. Versus the shift OEE, which is telling me how well is this line running in general of all of the various different products and SKUs that it's run across. How well did this particular product run on this particular line? Because that's also going to provide some insight into how efficient from some other, if all of a sudden line 1 is better at running an overall shift versus say line 2.
Yeah.
What's the difference? Why am I having issues between these two things? And you might find out we just can't get the raw material to line 2 as quickly as we can to line 1, or, it's got some old equipment on it, or there's some unreliable equipment on it. So those are some of the decisions that can come out of knowing what those various overall shift OEE is. And you can aggregate it the next step of looking at shift 1 and shift 2. You can also look at overall daily OEE, and you can just continue to aggregate it on and on and up.
Okay, amazing, David. So that's it for today. Do you have any last minute closing thoughts or remarks for our listeners?
Yeah, so coming out of this conversation, closing thoughts are that digital transformation doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to require a huge capital investment. It's something that you're going to do iteratively over time. But I will tell you is, reflecting back on my growth comment, it's that it's something that you're absolutely going to have to do, because if you don't, you're just not going to be successful. There's too much competition out there in order to not do it.
I completely agree. And my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be, obviously, Industry 4.0 is real. There's no question about that. There is real value to it. So if you are not paying attention to how it can benefit your shop floor, if your shop floor is completely disconnected at this point of time, it's not providing those real-time KPIs, you are not going to know how you can really benefit from your existing investments. On that note, David, I really want to thank you for your time. This has been a powerful episode.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about David, head over to g5ces.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Michael Peitel, who shares how he can create a far more precise digital twin of the warehouse by mapping warehouse workers in the system. Also, the interview with Kevin Paramore, who discusses the nuances of robotic automation of warehouse and manufacturing processes. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.